Welcome to True Wellness with Dr. D, the podcast where we explore what it takes to live with vitality, balance, and purpose. I am Dr. D, and each week I'll bring you powerful tools, inspiring stories, and expert insights to help you thrive in every area of your life. From health and wellness to mindset and navigating life's challenges, this podcast is your guide to creating a life of true well-being. Be sure to check the show notes and grab your free copy of the True Wellness Checklist so you can get started on your journey to true wellness right away. Now, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of True Wellness with Dr. D. So, what if I told you that conflict isn't something you can avoid? But what if it were something just to get curious about? What if instead of bracing yourself for battle, you could lean in, ask better questions, and transform that tension into understanding? Today, we're diving into a game-changing approach with conflict resolution expert Carol Barks, and she's here to show us how becoming conflict curious can turn our toughest conversations into really powerful opportunities for conversations. So get ready. This one's going to challenge the way you think about conflict forever. Welcome, Carol.
Hi, Dr. D. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So you guys, Carol is so special to me because she is this just extraordinary human being with this amazing heart, but she is gifted in engaging neuroscience-based conflict and communication management. She is a leader, a mediator, a best-selling author, a sought-after keynote speaker. Gosh, she teaches at multiple universities and provides training and consultation for a variety of notable organizations. She's actually had the honor of speaking at the United Nations and was described by Fox News TV as the top neuroscience and conflict resolution expert in the United States. Carol is featured on a multitude of outlets, including NBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, iHeartRadio, and she was also, this is a fun fact, a professional firefighter in the San Francisco Bay Area. What a blessing it is for us to have you here today, Carol, sharing your gifts with us.
Thanks, Danielle. That was a mouthful.
It
It's
was
funny.
well deserved.
Thanks.
So Carol and I actually shared the TEDx stage at TEDx Huntington Beach, and her talk is simply amazing. It's had over what, Carol? It's just a couple months, and you've had well over 1 million plus
Yeah,
views.
I think the last time I checked, it's like 1,350,000
Oh my gosh.
views.
So
Yeah.
this is a testament to the real impact that your story, your message, and your perspective on conflict really has. So I'm really excited to dive in because we deal with conflict every single day, don't we?
We do. And, like I said in my TED Talk, we can't avoid conflict. It's just we're always either heading into it or heading out of it or in a little, peaceful zone. But that's okay because that's really as much as it's uncomfortable or people think it's uncomfortable, it doesn't have to be. And it can be that thing that bounces you to a better place and a higher level. So sometimes just by rethinking it, it changes everything.
That's true. If we think about the other things in life, right? Like if we think about learning new things, when we learn something new, there's like this period where maybe we're like a little overwhelmed or we're feeling a little uneasy, but that period drives us to the higher level. And it's kind of what I'm hearing you say about conflict. Like we can take conflict and we can take it from something that may feel a little icky, maybe because we're not used to it or we're conflict averse, right? But if we actually move into it in the correct manner, it can change and transform a lot of things.
For sure. And a lot of it's skill set. So, I didn't grow up having conflict resolution skills. My family was quite contentious. My mom and dad were yellers, and our job as kids were to be quiet and do what our parents said. So I didn't learn really good habits. And in fact, most of us don't. So there's some research out there that says the average internal age of our conflict resolution skills is that of a 12-year-old. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the 12-year-old version of Carol, it was not my favorite chapter in time, right? And so I think it's really about just realizing that we are, perfectly imperfect, and it's just about shoring up our skills over time. And as we do, conflict becomes so much less contentious and scary.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the truth is, at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we're all kind of struggling with the same kind of internal dialogue and the internal conversations. I think that bring us to this space of conflict. But if I even think about, Carol, the environment, the where the world today is and how like conflict is just in our face all the time. And there certainly is not any conflict curiosity. It's all this like name calling and this is wrong and you're wrong. And I don't even know where to begin with that, because I almost feel like we've forgotten how to communicate as human beings.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And even in my line of work, I fight for a living. I wake up looking for a fight. Who am I fighting with today? And I say that, and really, who am I facilitating conversations between every day as a mediator or a negotiator? And I can tell you that they're harder jobs. Every case is harder now, it seems like, because people really are locked into their positions. And that whole conflict curiosity is something that we've forgotten to do. And the problem with that is what happens is we're now having monologues instead of dialogues. And we're doing, the cancel culture of, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to unfriend you on social media. I'm
Right.
not listen to you anymore. And so then we surround ourselves with people who agree with us, which does not help our skill set, right? And instead, the idea is, can I maybe not agree with you, but can I listen to you just for the sake of respect of different opinions and have a conversation about those? And I think that's where the curiosity piece comes in.
I love that because we have stopped listening. If you think about it for a second, we don't even call each other to talk on the phone anymore. Forget like being present with people in person, you know. But a lot of the conversations we have too, they're like via text messenger. And you talk about monologue and dialogue, and we think we're having a conversation with the person on the other side of that text message. And half the time, the other part of the conversation is actually going through our own brain because we can't see the person, we can't hear their intonation, we don't know if they're being for real or sarcastic. And so it's it's a different world that we live in. So how do we navigate through some of this? Because I can tell you a lot of our listeners would probably say that stress is one of the biggest things that impacts their life and their health. And one of the areas of stress comes in the form of relationships. And I think one of the biggest stressors within that realm of relationships is the communication, is conflict, is the lack of listening, as you've kind of just pointed out to us. So how can we start to navigate this?
Yeah, there's a couple where there's a ton to unpack there, which is so fun. I love these
Yes.
conversations. I love having them with you. And so the first thing I would say about those texts is when we look at the research on nonverbal communication, which was put out back in the day by Dr. Morabian out of UCLA, he was saying that the words only have 7% impact of the 100% of our communication. So that's really a small number. There's other people who have come along and said, well, it's higher numbers, but nobody really gives the words any more than 30% credit. And then what you're giving to those words really depend on if it's an emotional topic, or not. But either way, those words that we're texting or emailing to each other are just a little snippet. And one of the examples that I oftentimes give is the statement that because of my conflict curious nature, I oftentimes will ask if somebody says something, I'll say, that's really interesting. What are you thinking about that idea? Or just what are you thinking? In other words, my tone is like, tell me more.
Yeah.
And I went to go text that to somebody because somebody had texted me an idea and I said, what are you thinking? And thank goodness I didn't send it because that could easily come across as, what are you thinking? Right? In a text because people don't have the context.
Right.
So the first rule of thumb is slow down. We're
Hmm.
so busy. None of us can get everything done that we need to do. I know for me, I wake up in the morning with a to-do list, and by the end of the day, my to-do list is higher, but I worked my
Oh
butt
gosh.
off all
Yeah.
day, right?
Yes.
So slowing down is one, and fact checking. What did I hear?
Mm,
Rather than just taking those evil plot twists, as I call them, because when we don't
sure.
have dots connected, we always go to a dark place. And with the words, only we don't have all the dots connected. You can't see the smile on my face. You can't see the tone that you can't see me lean in and go, tell me everything you want to unpack. And
Yes.
that in itself is one of the things that we should be doing more is taking these conversations live. So I oftentimes say if we go back more than 3 times, that's time for a phone call.
I love that. Yeah. And how many emails go on and on forever, or text messages go on and on forever. And it's so funny. I think we've gotten to the space where we text message because we think it's saving us time. And it's like, well, I've just text messaged back and forth 15 times, waited 1 minute in between each text message when I could have just picked up the phone and been done with this conversation so much faster.
Indeed. And then that brings me to another just random fun fact is that every time we're interrupted, it takes us 20 minutes to get back on track. So you have those 15 minutes, but every time your brain is getting sidetracked by the ding of your phone. And so then that also leads to our tension that can lead to more conflict because now I've lost 20 minutes multiple times in the middle of these texts. And now I'm getting frustrated because the pressures of the day are not getting alleviated, so we've got to watch those types of things too.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because if I think about conversations and I think about conflict, it's always we're always putting things through a filter, right? We're always putting things through a filter of, our thoughts, our experiences, our feelings, our emotions. And so if we are in that state of frustration, then when we read that text message, for example, we already have a predisposition, so to speak, that we're going into that conversation with. And so all of a sudden, it's like things can spiral very quickly out of control. And you're like, well, wait a second, this started as a very simple conversation. And now we're like all the way over here.
Yes. And so if you think of the momentary things that your brain is experiencing, that can be problematic. And then you add to it the baggage we carry with our
Mhm.
brains in the form of pattern recognition. So our brains don't like to have to assess everything new because it's taking in so many billions of bits of information every
Yeah.
second that it likes to go, oh, this is what it is. And so the problem is if you think about some of your harder conflicts, they might be with your family or they might be with coworkers because we have history with them. And with that in mind, if my history with you is positive and you do something naughty, then I probably am going to say, she just had an off day, or this is just something's going on. But I'm not going to look at you as bad because you're not in my mind. But
Right.
if on the other hand, you and I have had it bumpy for a long time, and you think, I'm going to really work on my relationship with Carol, and you do something nice, I'm probably going to go, what is she up to now? What is she thinking? And I'm going to not give you the credit for doing something nice. So we really have to be careful of those filters, whether they're long term or momentary, they're critical that we assume the best.
It makes sense, right? Like, joking. jokingly, right? If my husband comes and he approaches me and he's all sweet and soft and whatever, and I'm like, okay, what do you want?
Right.
Right? We've all had that conversation. Or one of my children comes over and they're like, they're just doing nice things. You're like, okay, what do you want?
Or what did you do? You
Or
know?
what did you do exactly? Why are you buttering me up?
Yeah. Or alternately, do you ever have this one? I know I have it with if I there's a tone that I use, like if I'm sitting here in my office and I call one of my family members and my tone is a certain way, they'll say, "Is there something wrong?" You know, and I'm like, "No, I was just trying to get you to come in here so I didn't have to get up and leave my desk, you know."
Right.
In there. So it's, yeah, there's all of that and more, which reminds me of that tone is that oftentimes when we're in conflict, we get really snarky with each other
Mm,
and our
yes.
tone changes and we get harsh. And for me, if my tone changes to where I'm annoyed or stern, I can look peripherally and my dog is sleeking out of the room like, oh no, this isn't going to be good. And that's the really not the tone we want for
Right.
conflict. And the tone that really gets us farther is a conversational tone. Like if you and I were sharing our favorite beverage, whether that's water, coffee, tea, beer, wine, we would just be conversational like this. Our voice would be going higher and lower, and we'd be
Yes.
laughing. And that's the tone you want in conflict because it makes everything less aggressive to our brains.
Mm. Yeah, that's hard. The New Yorker in me. It's funny. I always joke when I'm angry, my Brooklyn comes out, right? And that's the exact opposite of what you're talking about because I'm assuming the minute that we enter into that snarky voice or that, really what it is we're putting up this wall. It's like we're protecting ourselves. This is like our self-defense. Like you're not going to get past me. Now I'm going to bring out the big guns and the strong me that's not going to let you in kind of thing, right? It's a defense mechanism. But when we do that, it automatically then puts the wall up on the other side.
Oh yeah, and there's a great remedy for it because essentially what it is a part of our brain called the limbic system, and within the limbic system we have two little guys called the amygdala or amygdalae because there's two of them in each hemisphere of our brain, but they're responsible for our freeze, fight, or flight or fawn response, and when they trigger, our thinking part of our brain shuts down, so we're closed for business and we're just reacting. And how we react, whether we get quiet or whether we fight, is really our brain deciding what's the best approach and how big is the threat that we're dealing with. And I'll tell you, we have these things also in our brains in the front sides called mirror neurons. And I just love them to pieces because they're so powerful. And so the rule of neuroscience and conflict is he or she who has control of their emotions the most wins. And so if I'm channeling Gandhi or Mother Teresa or whoever my favorite peacekeeper is, and you're as mad as heck, I will de-escalate you because we have these neurons that sync with each other and they go back to ancestral times when we were, a transitory migratory tribes, and we needed to pay attention to what people were feeling or visualizing. Were you coming to trade with me or were you coming to kill me and take my stuff? And so I tell a story that I love so much about my husband and that he's the one that can trigger me. So I fight with people all day long and it's fine, but there's no threat to me, right? So I can just chill and help them communicate and I can be that Mother Teresa model. But when my husband does something, I am like an angry chihuahua and he thinks it's funny. So I'm like, and then blah, 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 whatever it is, and I come up for air and blah, 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 blah. And he just looks at me with this soft look and says, did you get it all out? You got any more? And what happens is my automatically, I have no control over it. I start smiling to match his expression. And Danielle, it makes me so mad, because I'm not ready to not be mad. Uh,
Right.
it's over, and then he just smiles and says, and I'm like, I'm not done. And he'll say, I know, but can we just talk now? And it's so powerful, and it makes me think, you got to be careful what you teach your family members because they use my
Sure.
story against me. You know? But it's true. If you can be that peace, you can get that peace. And so you have that huge impact on the world just by how you show up.
I love that. So how do you, Carol, what is the secret formula for disconnecting when you're in that space, right? You just where you're stuck. You're like angry as all heck. Your adrenal glands are pumping out that cortisol and you're livid. And it's what I find is sometimes we're in that space. It's like we're out of control. Like to bring
Yeah.
ourselves in, like you said, we're literally not in control anymore, right? That our brain has taken off, it's on its own pathway. How do you start to bring it back?
Sure. So the first thing is that we can be observers of our own brain.
Mm,
So if you can notice, ooh, I'm starting to get triggered, then you can say, I need a break for a minute, or you can even express your emotions or feelings. We know that's one of the pro tips for negotiators is I can say, this isn't making me feel very good. So being able to express that
yeah.
can give me a minute to think. And if you can change your thought, Dr. Joan Rosenberg talks about the 90-second rule that if you, that first wave of chemicals that start triggering us take about 90 seconds to wash through. So if you can think a different thought, we
Yeah.
can get our brains back on track faster. But the other thing is I have to assume the best in you. So I'm not going to add to these evil plot twists. And then rather than getting defensive, this is where the conflict curiosity is. I just want to ask you questions about what you said. So you might have said something really mean to me that I want to get defensive about, or that I want to say something mean back to you.
Right.
Instead, I'm going to leave it with you. We're not going to play that tennis match game. I'm just going to stick with you and say things like, can you help me understand what you were hoping to achieve by that statement? Or can you tell me more about what it is that you're saying? There's some pretty strong statements. Are you really saying that they're all the time that I do this, or once in a while, or when do you see this come up? I'm just going to ask you the next best question. I'm going to leave it with you. And that means you have to do all the work to defend your statement or clarify your statement. And I just have to listen. And eventually, if I get enough information, you'll solve it yourself. I don't even have to really engage. I can just ask you. So, this is what you're seeing. This is why it's triggering you. What would you like me to do different? Okay. So, if I did this different, then you would feel better. Okay. How do I avoid this in the future for you? And you walk me through it. I just have to be curious about it.
I love that. Hence conflict curious.
Yeah, it's so much easier.
Mm,
And it's probably one of those things I get emails and, thank you notes of you changed my life with my team or with my family because you just don't have to work as hard. And that's the thing is people don't, we get defensive. We
mm.
don't know what to say. We get our feelings hurt. And if we just opted to sit back, so instead of leaning forward like that chihuahua and I'm going at you, can I just lean back and listen to you for a minute?
Yeah, take that threat back, take that threat
Yeah,
away. Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, because I can't change how you come at me, right? But I can impact how I come at you, which ultimately will change how you approach me. And over time, then you learn how to approach me differently, and you don't come across as aggressive because you don't need to. I'm safer to you.
Right.
So so there's that, and that's for people that we interact with a lot. Sometimes there's the one-offs with the people on the road, who cut us off, or people at the supermarket who are upset about something. And really, that's still the same. I can still choose how I come at you. If it's a one-off and I'm never going to see you again, I can still be kind and then just leave.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have to engage. I love that you said that. I feel like the environment that we live in today in our society and in our culture, there is, it's almost like we have to defend ourselves or we have to fight back. And what you're alluding to is, hey, maybe it's just not that, right? Maybe it's okay to just step back. And if it's something that we need to engage with further, then instead of coming at it with fists up, it's like, let's just ask the questions. Let's just try to listen and understand.
It's true. And if I listen to you on something that's an uncomfortable topic,
Mhm.
I really will get some growth out of it. And the growth is going to be, I understand where you're coming from. I understand what's motivating you to feel the way that you are. And very possibly that can help me realize that, wow, we're not really all that far apart. We have a different way of viewing it, but we both want the same thing.
Right.
And then that leaves me to, if I unpack you and I just keep asking you questions and I just want to know everything about what you're feeling about this topic at hand, then once we get you all packed, I can say, and we don't want to say but, because but is diminishing, but and is inclusive. If I'm saying, and can I add a few more thoughts to that? Typically you're much more likely to hear me
Mm.
than you would have been at the beginning if I'm just saying something and then you're saying something and then I'm saying something. Again, those are just monologues that just fall on deaf
Yes.
ears. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it makes so much sense. We're not, when we're in that space, we're not hearing anything anyway. So we can choose to just respond back and have all that snippiness,
Mhm.
right? Or we can just listen. We can just sit back. We can wait for, to use the analogy, the other person to kind of empty their cup,
Mhm.
have our understanding of what was in their cup, and then proceed forward. Is that just,
Indeed, indeed, because oftentimes, if we're really being honest, when you're talking, I'm thinking about what am I going to say next, right? Because I'm trying to prepare. And what I'm challenging our listeners to do right now is what if you didn't think about anything you were going to say next? You just fully listened and then made a statement off of what the other person said because they're providing all the content. So if you're not clear of what they're saying, you ask the clarifying question. If you are clear on what they're saying, you ask the next best question about what they're bringing to the table. You're using their brain to help them communicate with you. And so it makes it so much easier than trying to figure out what next brilliant thing is going to pop out of your brain. We don't want to use our brains. I want to use yours.
yeah. Wow. It's a totally different perspective, right? Especially like me, I'm super analytical, right? And I want to always have it right and always make sure that I've strategically come up with the next thing. But what if we didn't have to strategize? What if that next thing was already right in front of us and we're just looking to identify it rather than to figure it out?
Yes. And talk about us control freaks out there. That's a very scary thing, right? Because I'm like, wait, you're suggesting that I don't come up with my brilliant things. And yet, that's what our conversations are out in the wild when we're not having conflict. You say something, and I say something about what you said, and we're just building on it. And there's zero pressure to think about what we want to say. And so, why would it be any different in conflict?
Mhm. That's right. That makes a lot of sense. So how do we, so what if we are that person that gets fiery? How do you de-escalate that fiery within yourself in that moment? What do you do?
Yeah, so sometimes it takes a minute, right? So the fun fact about me is I'm human, so
Yeah.
I can know this, I can tell you what to do, and I can still not live up to it. And so sometimes that means you take a break, right? Sometimes that says I might say, I am not going to say anything productive right now. So I just need a few minutes to, really process this. Or can we talk about this a different day? Maybe we are trying to talk about it now and we're not really getting anywhere. So maybe we pause because there's a really great thing that happens when we sleep. So back in the day, do you remember there was an old, wives' tale of you should never go to bed angry, with
Yes.
your partner. And that's not true because when we sleep, there's a couple things that happen, and you know this, I'm sure, is that your brain gets a little chemical bath of all the toxins that were released during that day. But then we also connect neurons. So the stuff that we talked about today will connect with the stuff that's in our brains already. And that's why you oftentimes wake up with bright, fresh ideas, because when we're not working our brains so much, that's when they get the chance to do the brilliant work that we really want them to do. And so sometimes we brainstorm first or get to a point where we're not being productive and we save it for another day because we oftentimes can process what the other person said, what we're thinking about, and come up with a better idea.
Mm. I love that.
And noticing that. So, we all have those physiological cues when we're getting escalated. So, I want to notice them in me. I got to take care of me first, or I can't be present for you. And I also want to notice yours. So, do you get red when you get mad?
Maybe slightly.
Yeah, some people get really red, and you notice it like you have a V-neck shirt on, you'll get blotchy up here, and then it'll go, and our faces will get red like a tomato. And that's a sign that our stress chemicals are, running amok inside of our body. And we want to catch them. If somebody's getting blotchy there, of course, we don't see that in ourselves as much, but we can say, ooh, they're about to lose their ability to have a constructive conversation with
Yes.
me. But for me, I notice I potentially, depending on how high the stakes are, my voice might crack.
Mhm.
Or I noticed I had some really tough clients last week. And this is something that rarely happens to me, but it did last week. I started shaking after the fact. So I was having a chemical reaction from that. And I also see that in other people a lot where they start shaking or our pitch gets higher and we start
Yeah.
talking faster. So
Mhm.
if I notice that, those are things that back to, I try to tackle these conversations like removed. I try to be an observer of
Right.
them
Right.
rather than in them. And when I start noticing that, then I can say, "Ooh, Carol, you're getting triggered. What is it about this that's triggering you?" And
Mhm.
then when I get curious about myself, I have more of an ability to manage those responses.
I love that. I think the more and more we can be observers of ourselves, the more facility it actually gives us to understand what's happening for us, not just physiologically, but emotionally, mentally, because we all come with our own baggage. It's like, hey, am I being triggered by this conversation because I'm starting to feel unsafe because I have this history of all these unsafe things that have happened to me, or when I was a little girl, mom said something similar to what so and so is saying.
Yeah.
Now I'm all shaking and jiggery, and my cortisol is flying through my body. And it's interesting because I know for me personally, I like to start to observe, okay, like what is that? What is that got triggered? Because it is an area of opportunity. Like if there is and something that makes me feel unsafe, I can be like, oh, you know what? It reminds me of that time when I was in elementary school and the teacher accused me of doing something I didn't do. And then I know, okay, I've got to do some personal work on whatever that was to go clear that. And then I, as a human being, get to evolve and grow. And I no longer have to carry that baggage with me.
It's so true. And that is a really important question to ask oneself too, is this really about the conflict Danielle and I are having right now, or is this about something that feels like that? So one of the things back to my childhood of not such great communication, when I got into high school and I started seeing things as this is right and this is wrong, everything was much more concrete. If I had the courage to speak up to my parents, my mom would say, "Oh, Carol, calm down."
Mm.
And to this day, I hate that term, and I know where it comes from. If I hear it, I'm like, ooh, that's that minimizing term my mom used to use. So it
Right.
doesn't trigger me anymore. But if I hear it with my clients, it might be where I pause and suggest that they use different language that's not so demeaning in there. But initially, that term would make me mad, right? Until I did the work and was like, oh, this is what it's about. It's old stuff, and I don't need to carry that forward.
Yeah, it's so true. We're often not typically responding to what we think we're responding to. And I mean, I think that's part of the big piece in unraveling what's happening in a conversation sometimes. It's like I might be
Absolutely.
having an argument with my husband, but who I'm really arguing with is like, my mom when I was 13, like you said. And I think when you can start to distinguish that, it gives you a lot more freedom in terms of dealing with communicating with other people.
Yeah. And that reminds me of one of the big things that happens in the world of negotiation is that we often argue about positions when really what we should be sharing is our interests. So positions are our demands, the things that I want this. So if it was a divorcing couple and they had kids, I want full custody of the kids. No, I want full custody of the kids. When really what they need is, I don't want to feel minimized as a parent, or I'm afraid of losing my time with my children, or I want to know that I have the ability to continue on in some way with my family structure. And those are different conversations, right? We could just argue about the schedule all day, or we could talk about shoring up what we need. Yeah, so just last night, back to my hubby, there was a project that I wanted him to do. And I got a little like, when are you going to do this project? And so we're
Right.
talking about this project, and his response was, have you shown me how to do the project yet? So we could have gone there, right? Which could have been a conflict. And really, I just needed to pause, and I went about it a different way. This project is causing me stress because I can't do the next things that happen that we've talked about are so important. And so I'm finding that it's standing in the way of progress, which is causing me some concern about the timelines that we committed to. And he said, oh, I so get that. You're right. So what does tomorrow at 1 look like? So it was just, I told him what it was about, and then we were able to get there. And it's so much easier than just going, well, I can't do it because you haven't trained me. Well, if you just came around and asked to be trained, I could do it. It's so much easier.
So much easier. And then think about the following piece of that, right? Like, so tomorrow at 1, it becomes a pleasant interaction versus, this you're walking into this interaction where you're both feeling, a little bit of anger and resentment. So then changes the whole course of your day. But not only that, I mean, I look at everything from an energetic perspective. It really changes the outcome and changes the chances of success ultimately, right? Because you're coming at it one from a positive angle and the other one from that anger, fear, resentment.
Right. And it changes your relationship, right? You just fight so much less with people when you assume the best, when you become more observing, when you ask those next best questions, when you're really clear about what it is that you need from what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those things change the game. And I would say one other thing that changes the game is we've got to not make things personal. We've got to talk
Mm.
about the problem or the process that's going wrong, but we don't want to minimize the other person or belittle them or say, you never do this or you're so
Right.
lazy. That's then makes me want to defend who I am.
Yes.
And if yet you say, I'm really concerned this project isn't getting done, it's about the project.
Hey, this is Dr. D. I just wanted to remind you that you can get started on your true wellness journey. Go ahead and check the show notes and grab a link to the True Wellness Checklist. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I'm not hitting somebody's character. So you can have a complaint about a process, but there isn't such thing as constructive criticism. It's only taken positively like once in 13 times. So it's not a good skill to, put your hat on and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to criticize them until they give me what I want. So. but we're
Yeah.
good at doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's different, right? Feedback is different than criticism. And when we are in that attack mode, like you did bad, you are wrong, like that person is not, they're not going to be open to anything else because they've already now shrunk back.
Right. And there's a strategy for giving feedback or just really more about sharing your perspective that I love to use. It's called the often strategy.
Okay.
And so it's an acronym, and O stands for observe,
Mm.
and F stands for feel,
Hmm.
and T stands for think, or, I oftentimes also say it can be like the story you tell yourself about it. E stands for empathy or empathizing, and N stands for negotiating. So, one example might be when my youngest kiddo was in high school, their job was to do the dishes after dinner. But this same kiddo had a goal in life that drove me nuts. They wanted to be a professional gamer. It was so different than my college bound goal for them, right? And so gaming oftentimes happens at nighttime for the teams that they wanted to be on. And so I always, at that point in time, would make a cooked breakfast every morning because I wanted them to have a lot of protein and have a good breakfast to start off their day. And so I'd come down and the kitchen would be a disaster. So then I had to clean the dishes in order to make breakfast, which then put me behind in the work I was going to do. And it would tick me off, honestly.
Yes.
Using the often strategy, I could say something like, I noticed when I came downstairs the dishes weren't done. So that's what I observed.
Hmm.
And it made me feel so frustrated and let down and sad because that's your one chore. And the story I tell myself about this is that the dishes got in the way of gaming. And the empathizing part is I know how important that is for you. And I also know how much you enjoy breakfast. So, could we sit down and figure out a way that you can do your gaming and take care of the one chore that you have so that I don't want to kill you on regular mornings, right? And so
Right.
I'm not attacking my kiddo at all. I'm just talking about the situation, right? And so
Right.
now we are partners in solving it rather it being me against them.
I love that. I love that. It's much better than coming down and screaming, the dishes aren't done again. What the heck is wrong with you? Were you
Right. Get
playing
me
that
out of
dumb
here
video game?
now. Yeah.
Sure, I've had dialogue come out of my mouth like that with my kids in the past.
Right. Indeed. Indeed. Yeah, it changes everything and it just makes everything safer. And that's the thing is, can I create that safety around hard topics? Like it doesn't mean we're not going to be friends. It doesn't mean I think any less of you. It just means that we don't see eye to eye on something yet, maybe.
It's so true. And the biggest thing is going back to what you said earlier is the pause, right? We've got to actually stop and pause before we begin these conversations. Otherwise, it's a survival mechanism as human beings. We're always looking out to survive, and that's the way our brain was designed. But if we can take that pause, then we can move into a different pathway, right? We can take the conversation in a different direction versus where that most knee jerk would take us.
Right, exactly. And that pause is especially available to you when you're dealing with email or text. You don't have to
Mhm.
just go bam, 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 done, and then you make a statement that you're going to regret. You've made the situation worse.
Yeah.
And that whole old saying of two wrongs don't make a right, you either can help, you either are making a deposit or taking a withdrawal from the relationship. And you should not ever be doing withdrawals. We do them from time to time accidentally, but just because somebody took a withdrawal doesn't mean you should. That does not get us out of this conflict any faster. It just makes them feel like they are justified in their thoughts and that they don't have to listen to you. So
Right.
and I want people to listen. I think if our mouths are moving, we're hoping somebody's going to listen to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of our basic needs as a human being is just to be seen and heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, we shouldn't we don't deserve to be abused. So I'm not saying you don't have boundaries.
Right.
And I can say if somebody's yelling at me, I can ask them, can you just talk a little softer? I can hear you better when you're not yelling at me. Or I can even ask, did you notice you're yelling? And sometimes people don't notice, or they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I just this is just a very upsetting topic. And then they can self-regulate, so there are so many nice ways that you can manage these tough topics that
Mhm.
make them settle down so much easier that and they're like superhero powers, right? It just doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that when we take the pause, when we take the time, when we actually transition, we end up with such lower levels of stress because now we're not bound up by this whole conflict and all that negative energy. So there's so much benefit to it.
Yeah, and of all people would be able to talk to the benefits of our body of not having stress,
Yeah.
right? But when
Mhm.
we're stressed, it lowers our IQ points, and who wants that, right? And our memory gets tanked, and yeah, it's brutal.
Yes, we can't have an effective conversation anyway.
Right. For
So we're
sure.
literally spinning our wheels just in the wrong direction unless we take that pause, unless we kind of figure it out. And like you said, sometimes it's just about stepping away for a little while, you know?
Indeed. And if we shut people down, I've been talking a lot about interpersonal relationships as far as our, intimate partners or family, but even at work, if we shut down the ability to have difficult conversations, then people will self-silence because it's just not worth the trouble. And then that impacts our organizations, by billions and billions of dollars in conflict. And there's statistics out there that talk about managers spend a good chunk of their time managing conflict. If we didn't have that conflict and we could have productive conversations that express concerns or differences, then we could all actually do the work that we want to be doing that move organizations forward rather than spending time doing damage control on bad communication skills.
Mhm. Yeah, the world would be a different place, wouldn't it? Our
Yeah.
whole environment would be different if we just started to ask questions differently, approach conflict differently, and pause, and
Yes.
communicate like human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I
And
love that.
wonder why. So sometimes, say that you're listening to this podcast and you've written down all these notes and you are now like, I'm going to learn all these things step by step by step. Then the other person comes in hot and they've not listened to this podcast and they have all those naughty behaviors that I'm suggesting you should try to avoid. Then what do we do with that, right? That means that we have to meet them where they're at. That might be where you have to do those boundaries. That might be where you're teaching them by way of your communicating that to behave differently. And have you ever noticed when there's somebody who just is like Dr. D, you would know, like working with Jean-Louis, he just
Yes.
is like the nicest man. He's our movement coach, and he's the nicest man on the planet. And I doubt he has a lot of people arguing with him because that's just not, he kind of comes across like Yoda, right?
Yes, he
He's,
does. Very much so. Yes.
yeah. And so you just don't go there. Like you just don't need to because he's just not creating that space. It's just going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And that, I mean, I think that goes back to the whole mirroring aspect that you talked about. Like if you're coming in really soft, eventually that other person is they're going to have to come down.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean not firm,
Right.
right? Um, you might be saying that might be, and still, I am going to request that you do this, or I'm going to walk away until we can have a more productive conversation. And if you feel like we can talk, let me know, and I will hop back in with you. But this doesn't feel good to me right now, so I need to step away. You can say those things.
Yeah.
Just say them firmly but kind. So a lot of people will say, well, I'm really direct. And I am too. I'm very, very direct, but I'm always kind in my directness.
Right. Right. there's a difference between kind and nice, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to pretend to do things that are nice, but we should always be kind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think there's also just the idea of respect. Like, just because you have a different opinion than I do doesn't mean you don't deserve respect. It just means we have a differing opinion, right? I still should respect you as a human.
Yeah, I know I always look to have that space of empathy, like wonder what it's like in their shoes, like what it's like over there, what's happening for them. And I think when we can do that, we can understand that we recognize that, hey, we're all human. That person over there is struggling with the same things that I might be struggling with over here, even though we have completely opposite views or opinions or, stances or what have you.
Yeah, and then that's another brain hack, right? Is we all like people who are like us. We like people that look like us. We like people who have the same birthday as us. We like people who have
Right.
the same. And that's just our self-sorting of our brain. So we're not as comfortable around people who have differing opinions or are different than us. And yet, when we look at what makes dynamic teams and the teams that come up with the best ideas, they are teams that are very diverse in their thought processes. And we as humans oftentimes are really uncomfortable with that. And yet, in that discomfort is where those brilliant ideas come from because people push us beyond yeah, I think exactly what you think, when really there could be maybe a little bit more,
Yeah.
right? And so commonalities can help us open our ears to people. And that might be that we're both female, or that we both did our TED Talk together, or that we both want to make the world a better place. But then there's also some basic assumptions, and truths. I mean, we're both human, right? And we both have kiddos, and we both want the world to be better for our children.
Yeah.
And that can start right where we're at. So there's a book I'm reading right now just because I'm always in the world of conflict, and because our world is so chaotic, it's really around how do you bring peace when there's civil wars. And the person who wrote the book has gone and done a lot of mediations in countries that are fighting, all over the world, whether it's in Africa or Europe and what they found is the thing that's the game changer is the people around us. So the community that shores us up, the you and me getting together and going, this isn't working for our kids and our grandkids. And what are
Yeah.
we going to do? And what do you know is going on your side? And here's what I know what's going on my side. And what do we want to try to do? Well, maybe we want the village market to stay open because that's where we all get our food and trade. So maybe
Yes.
we create processes so that we can all go get what we need. And then in our talking, you go back and share what you know. Really they're not that bad. They're just as terrified as we are about all of this or concerned. And then those are the things that make the move. So I think right now we have this thought that the world is really uncertain and it's really scary and there's really a divide, and there is.
Mm.
Still, we have so much power to create the change on such a little level
Oh,
by communicating with each other locally.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Carol, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing this. I always ask our guests, what are three things that our listeners can take on right now to begin to transform in their world of, conflict and dealing with other people in their life? What are those top three things that we can leave them with?
Learn to be curious, not just about what they're saying, but what it is that's really driving them. So don't pay attention to the words as much as you are like, where are they coming from? What's really on their mind? And then if you're not sure, be curious. And even if you think you are sure, be curious, ask those questions, and then always show up the way you want other people to be because you have so much ability to change the trajectory of your conversations by being the person you want to be in communication with.
I love that. That puts the power back in our own hands. And that is a beautiful thing. And you guys, please check out Carol's TEDx talk. It is moving, extraordinary, and will certainly bring home this piece of conflict curious. The link for her TEDx talk is in our show notes. And Carol, how can people learn more about you and your work and all the wonderful things that you are up to?
Yeah, they can go to my website, carolbarks.com, and it's Barkes. And they can always reach out to me if they want me to come teach, train, speak. I'm always happy to do that. And even if people have a random question, they can just connect with me, and I'm always happy to follow up. We all have to help each other, right? And so I'm always around.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of True Wellness with Dr. D. We'll see you next week. This is Dr. D reminding you to tune into your body, connect with what matters, and embrace the journey to true wellness. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's ready to redefine their health. Be sure to grab a copy of the True Wellness checklist right in the show notes. Let's keep redefining wellness and empowering change together. See you for the next episode.